A simple glucose control food, walking, system model, number 1626, 5/2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category diabetes, stroke, lifestyle medicine. Special note, this research journal is based on my personal research using data from my own body and is provided for educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice and should not be interpreted as guidance from medical professionals. Introduction. This morning provided another clear real-life example of how I manage my glucose using a system-based approach developed over the past 17 years. This method is not based on memorizing food nutritional tables or following fixed guidelines. Instead, it is based on first understanding the overall structure of the system, then applying simple arithmetic estimation, and finally refining the details when needed. Start with the big picture, not the details. In any complex system, especially the human biomedical system, the first step is not precision. The first step is to understand the grand scale, moving direction, and system boundaries. You must first establish the upper and lower limits, the expected range, and the dominant variables, not secondary noise. Only after this mountain view is clear should you move into fine detail. Many people make the opposite mistake. They jump immediately into small details, arguing about grams, percentages, or minor differences, without first forming a correct overall picture. Without overall structure, these details only create confusion rather than improving understanding. My simple conversion rule, food to glucose, from more than 18,000 meals observed over 16.5 years. I have developed a simple internal rule: 1 gram of carbohydrate or sugar intake leads to approximately 8 milligrams ADL increase in my blood glucose within 15 to 30 minutes of post-meal time. This is a personal, data-driven approximate coefficient that allows me to make fast and practical estimations of my post-meal glucose ppg in real time. Example 1: boiled peanuts before sleep. Last night, before sleep, I ate 2 medium fists of boiled peanuts. 1 fist of boiled peanuts is approximately 8 grams of carbohydrates and sugar more. Carbohydrates, therefore, 2 fists are approximately 16 grams of carbohydrates and sugar. The estimated glucose rise of ppg is 16 times 2 equals 32 milligrams DL. This is based on my assumption that each gram of carbohydrate or sugar intake increases my blood glucose by approximately 2 milligrams DL. With a baseline post-meal glucose of approximately 110 milligrams DL, not fasting glucose or FPG of approximately 100 milligrams DL, the estimated level becomes 110 plus 32 equals 142 milligrams DL. My CGM results showed peak 180 milligrams DL LOWEST 100 milligrams average around 140 milligrams, health estimate of 142 milligrams DL closely matched the observed average of approximately 140 milligrams DL. Besides, the dawn phenomenon of my FPG fasting plasma glucose list shows a climb from 149 milligrams DL to 178 mg DL between 0 o'clock and 1:45. This confirms that the boiled peanut effect is long-lasting, providing a sustained energy release throughout the night. By using 110 milligrams DL as a dynamic baseline rather than a static 100 milligrams DL, I account for the system noise of daily activity, which makes my predictions more robust. Example 2, banana as a single meal. A large banana contains approximately 30 grams of carbohydrates, with a relatively high proportion of sugar. The first level estimate is 30 times 2 approximately equals 60 milligrams DL. Instead, it is driven by the high proportion of rapidly absorbed sugars and the relatively low fiber content, which accelerate glucose absorption. This difference is not due to a calculation error. It reflects the effect of absorption speed and food structure, rather than total carbohydrate quantity alone. Here, I have also identified that while carbs are an additive factor on glucose, the interaction of sugar and fiber is multiplicative, amplifying or dampening the rate of change. Note on absorption speed and glucose rising. Over the past 17 years, I have developed a clear understanding of how different types of carbohydrates and sugar affect my blood glucose. Sugar is part of total carbohydrates, but its behavior is different because it is absorbed much faster. This faster absorption directly increases the rate of glucose entering the bloodstream, which leads to a higher and earlier peak in post-meal glucose ppg. At the same time, fiber plays an important regulatory role. It slows down the digestion and absorption process, reducing the speed at which glucose appears in the bloodstream. As a result, even when the total carbohydrate amount is the same, the glucose response can be significantly different depending on the composition and structure of the food. Therefore, glucose response is not determined by total carbohydrate quantity alone. It is also strongly influenced by absorption rate, which is governed by the proportion of sugar and the presence of fiber. This explains why foods with similar carbohydrate content can produce different ppg outcomes within a certain time frame. System insight: quantity versus speed. Boiled peanuts are absorbed slowly and produce a lower and wider glucose curve. In contrast, banana is absorbed quickly and produces a higher, narrower, and sharper ppg peak. The carbohydrate amount remains important, but the speed of absorption also plays a critical role. The same quantity of carbohydrates can therefore produce very different glucose responses. Example 3. Walking as a glucose reduction tool. Now we examine the opposite side of the system, which is how to reduce glucose after eating. From my long-term tests and observations, a typical meal contains about 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrates. Using an average of 25 grams, the expected glucose increase is approximately 50 milligrams dl. With a daytime baseline of 110 milligrams dl, the post-meal glucose rises to about 160 milligrams dl. To bring glucose back down toward 120 milligrams dl, I need to reduce approximately 40 milligrams dl. From repeated experience, this requires approximately 2,000 to 2,500 walking steps. From this, I derive a simple working rule: 1,000 steps reduce glucose by approximately 15 to 20 milligrams dl, and 2,000 steps reduce glucose by approximately 30 to 40 milligrams dl. This relationship is not exact, but it is sufficiently consistent to guide my daily decisions on diet and exercise. Arithmetic as a system language. In principle, addition equals accumulation, subtraction equals dissipation, multiplication equals interaction and amplification, division equals normalization, and long-term scaling. Recently, I began to reflect on the meaning of arithmetic operations. We all learned addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division in elementary school, but we were not taught what these operations represent in real systems. Addition represents accumulation, such as glucose increase after food intake. Subtraction represents reduction, such as glucose decrease after walking. Multiplication represents amplification, where factors interact with each other and strengthen the overall effect. A side point: extension to real-life legal systems. This concept is not limited to physics or medicine. It also applies to human behavior and legal systems. One violation is different from multiple violations. The consequence is not always linear. It is often amplified rather than simply added. For example, when a person commits several crimes at the same time, the punishment may be cumulative, but it can also be served concurrently, depending on how the court structures the sentences. Therefore, it is not always a simple addition such as 2 plus 3 4 equals 9 years in prison. However, if the same crime is committed again, the penalty is often increased due to repeat offense rules. The prison term may be longer than the original sentence, not simply repeated, reflecting an escalation in legal severity. Law is not like natural science. It does not follow fixed equations with predictable outputs. Legal systems have structured rules, but they also allow human judgment. Judges must consider context, intent, history, and social impact. Because of this, outcomes are not always linear or strictly predictable. What appears as inconsistency is often the result of applying general rules to complex human situations, rather than purely emotional reactions. When human judgment is involved, scientific principles can still guide analysis, but the system becomes less deterministic and more context-dependent, preventing precise, equation-based prediction. The above legal-related discussion is not directly related to my subject. Nevertheless, it reflects a general principle that multiple interacting factors produce nonlinear outcomes in natural systems. Important principle: total first, detail second. This discussion reinforces a key principle. First, understand the total system behavior of carbohydrates and glucose. Second, apply simple arithmetic estimation for an intuitive solution. Third, refine with minor adjustments such as fiber, absorption speed, timing, and physical conditions. If this order is reversed, the structure is lost and the analysis becomes ineffective. My glucose method: simple but powerful. Over 17 years, I reduced my estimated average glucose EEG from over 300 milligrams dl to about 100 milligrams dl without Medication intervention. This was achieved by converting food content into a quantitative input, applying a simple approximate conversion rule, and quickly estimating my post-meal glucose. I then use walking steps as a correction tool to reduce my post-meal glucose level. This constitutes a simple and easy method of continuously observing and adjusting my diabetes condition. This is a closed-loop control process. Practical conclusion: carbohydrates and sugar determine the upward movement, while walking steps determine the downward movement. The speed of absorption affects the glucose peak height, and fiber plays a minor adjustment role. Arithmetic operations provide a simple yet powerful modeling tool set. There is no need for differential equations, energy theory, viscoplasticity, or topology. Final reflection: the key to controlling glucose is not to begin with detail, but to begin with a grand view of the structure, understand the big picture, apply simple arithmetic, and then refine. This approach allows fast, practical, and effective glucose control in real life, from a system engineering perspective. Both biomedical systems and human behavioral systems share a common structure. Addition describes accumulation, while multiplication describes interaction and amplification. Certain real-life systems, such as legal, operate in a hybrid manner, combining both effects. Understanding this structure is important. If we think only in terms of addition, we underestimate repeated effects. If we think only in terms of addition, we underestimate repeated effects. If we think only in terms of multiplication, we risk overestimation. The correct approach is to understand the total structure first and then apply the appropriate level of interpretation. Conclusion: based on this morning's data, 2/5 of peanuts produced a moderate and expected glucose rise, with an average around 140 mg dl, consistent with my model. Blood pressure and pulse pressure remain stable. So the multiplicative stroke risk in this early morning remains stable and safe due to lower blood pressure. Despite the fact that eating boiled peanuts before sleep was not an appropriate action, the key insight is that glucose elevation alone is not the main danger. The real risk comes from the timing and interaction between multiple factors, particularly glucose and blood pressure. Epilogue: from grand view to close measurements, A+8. This morning's discussion was itself a meaningful experiment. At the beginning, I described my thoughts based on long-term experience and intuition. The initial response from the I tool focused on detail before structure, which is a common pattern in most humans and AI systems. I clarified that my approach begins with a distant grand view, looking at the entire mountain first, based on 17 years of accumulated life experience. Only after establishing that macro view first could I then move closer to measure micro details. After this clarification, the discussion shifted. The AI tool adjusted its approach and aligned with the macro first structure from my brain. From that point, the collaboration became smooth and productive. This demonstrates an important principle: first, establish the macro structure, then refine the micro details. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.